It's been just over a week since the government approved the Trans Mountain pipeline expansion for a second time. But Alberta's premier has said he won't celebrate until the oil is flowing. When will Canadians see shovels in the ground, and what's the new timeline for the project's completion? Ian Anderson is president of the Trans Mountain Corporation, the Crown Corporation now responsible for operating the existing Trans Mountain pipeline on behalf of the Canadian taxpayer. Mr. Anderson, welcome to our program today. Thanks for being our guest.
Thanks so much for having me, Heather.
As soon as the government's decision came down last week, we saw images everywhere of pipes on rail cars, which sparked a lot of interest. As we speak today, sir, what is happening with construction?
Yeah, we're not actively constructing anywhere. The rail cars that we saw going through Calgary were coming from Regina and headed to Kamloops, to a stockpile location that we have there. We don't yet have all of the approvals in place to commence any construction activity. The National Energy Board will run a process that will take some number of weeks to essentially reinstate us back to where we were last August with all of the approvals necessary to get back to work. But yeah, we do have about a third of the pipe now in yard locations between Vancouver and Edmonton. So we'll be ready to go once we're given the green light.
And ready to go, you have said repeatedly you expect those shovels in the ground by September. But as you mentioned, one of and the first of the outstanding issues where you still have to get sign-off, that's the NEB, the National Energy Board. How challenging will it be, do you think, to meet the 156 conditions?
Yeah, we met all of the conditions previously that enabled us to get back to work or start work last year. Some of them need to be refiled, and we're in the process of putting that together, and that won't be an onerous task. So the conditions themselves have largely been met already, and the process we're going to go through with the National Energy Board is to reaffirm that they have in fact been met, have their approvals brought forward, have our route redetermined and reestablished by the NEB, and then we can get back to work. So we're anticipating that process is going to take a number of weeks, and as you said, we're ready and expecting to be back to work in early to mid-September. But again, the process is going to be what it's going to be, and we'll be ready for whatever requirements come from it. But we're not anticipating anything surprising to come out of it.
There will also be, Mr. Anderson, almost certainly more legal challenges. I'm thinking whether they come from environmental groups, First Nations, Burnaby, Vancouver, the province of BC. And I'm just wondering how confident you are in the work the government did in this second round of consultations. Is it solid enough, do you think, to withstand any future legal challenges?
Well, I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not going to predict what cases might be brought forward and what the base of those cases might be. We'll see that when it comes, I think, and have our views when that occurs. But what I can say is, we worked relatively closely with the efforts of Minister Sohi's office and others in Ottawa under the guidance of Justice Iacobucci. And the effort and the time and the energy put into those discussions with Indigenous communities along the right-of-way and in proximity were a tremendously a proud moment, really, for me to see the kind of commitment these individuals had to learn and listen and provide accommodation suggestions back to the communities to address their concerns. So from an on-the-ground standpoint in the effort and the discussions and the meaningful nature of those discussions, I feel very, very good about it. I think Cabinet felt good about it, or they wouldn't have granted the approval last week that they did.
There has been as well the threat of protest. What do you anticipate at the construction sites?
Well, we'll be prepared for that. It's been a fabric of the project up till now, and I expect it'll be part of what we will face going forward. And I fully respect people's right to have different points of view and to express those views. We just, urge everybody to be civil and obedient and law-abiding, so that my workers, our contractors, and the assets around which we work are safe and secure. So, as I said, we're prepared for those activities. We hope they're done in a law-abiding way, and the protection of the people is first and foremost my concern.
I'm wondering what level of a guarantee you have from the government again on this, that it will take measures to counteract any protesters and to talk about the safeguards that you mentioned, because the finance minister was asked about this in Calgary last week, and he declined to say what steps Ottawa would take to ensure the project was completed, and whether they would go even as so far as to use the Army to enforce any injunctions. Do you need that?
I'm not going to speculate on what authorities may have to do or what may have to be brought to bear. We've got our security measures in place to ensure the safeguard of the facilities and the people. We'll continue to adhere to that. We've got an injunction in place, a standing injunction that is intended to keep those places safe. And if anything more is required, that's going to be, left to the authorities at the time to determine.
Okay. At some point, the government wants to sell this pipeline, and I know you've said recently it's premature to think about the next phase of ownership, but let's do that for a moment anyway, because you certainly have spoken previously about your support for Indigenous ownership in some form, and I'm wondering whether you still support that idea, that concept now.
Personally, I do. It'll be up to my owner ultimately to decide on what terms that takes place and with which party, counterparty, and at what point in time. And I think that's going to be the trick to it, is determining how to transact on some Indigenous ownership for this pipeline. There are many groups that are interested in some kind of economic participation.
Do you support the one or any of the other groups that have come forward? I'm thinking of Iron Coalition, Project Reconciliation. Do you favor one or the other at this point?
I don't favor one over the other. They're all a wee bit different. They all represent different communities. They all have their own, I think, very, very good aspects to what they're suggesting, and I think it'll be up to the government to decide who and when that gets transacted. But personally, I believe we can find a solution to it, and I think it would be a very meaningful component of reconciliation for our nation to provide some economic opportunity off of a pipeline project like this.
Beyond meaningful, I'm wondering if it's imperative. Can Trans Mountain succeed without some form of Indigenous investment?
I think it can. We've got an owner that's committed to seeing the construction through, an owner that's committed to invest the capital to see it through. We're commercially supported. We have our approvals. We have the support of, dozens of First Nations along the right-of-way who are looking for the jobs and opportunities that will come with it. So I think we can construct it without it, but I do think it would be a very worthwhile endeavor to seek some Indigenous ownership down the line.
Let's look ahead to completion. You have said that oil will be flowing, if all goes well, in 2022. What will the market look like for the oil then?
My expectation, my hope would be that by mid-22, when we're ready to construct or ready to go into service, that the investment climate has improved in Alberta and Canada, that we're attracting more investment to what is, one of the world's largest, safest, most highly regulated, and environmentally responsible resources. Accessing tidewater, getting to global markets will improve the pricing that producers get for their barrel, and that's going to have a ripple effect through the economy. So we're focused on the task at hand. The markets always change. Markets are going to dictate ultimately how much movement occurs in which direction. We're going to give them an outlet to global prices that they don't have today, and that's going to be very, very important.
So that is a projection, and it is an optimistic projection. Certainly the hope is a robust Asian market. That's always been the plan. I'm wondering whether you're concerned, though, watching what is playing out right now, whether we're relying as a country, whether Canada's relying too heavily on the Chinese market, given this deepening diplomatic dispute, which is already affecting canola and meat. Could it affect oil, too?
I don't know, and I'm not going to speculate on how those things are going to transpire. We do know that, trade disputes come and go, they ebb and flow. We're currently in an unfortunate situation with China on the fronts that you mentioned. This is a long-term asset with a long-term, market access objective. We're not in service for several years from now. I think that trade situations then will be what they will be, and I think that the basis of the viability of the project is that global markets are there, they're growing, they're requiring more resources. We have them, we can't get them there today, and we'll be able to get them there in a few years.
Could this be Canada's last pipeline, Mr. Anderson?
Gee, another speculation. I don't know. We've got Line 3 that Enbridge is obviously pursuing completion of, and TC Energy's pursuing the completion of Keystone XL. And with this pipe, if all three come into service sometime in the next few years, I think that positions the upstream producing market well for into the next decade. And then it'll all be dependent upon demand. It'll all be dependent upon investment into Alberta's production and how much that's going to grow, and then what markets it's seeking to access. But I think certainly these three pipes, if all brought in service, will see us well into the next decade of capacity need.
You know, the plan to twin the pipeline, as you well know, was announced back in 2012, and it won't be flowing, if all goes well, until 2022, a full decade. It wasn't expected, as I recall, to generate this level of controversy because it wasn't a new pipeline, it's just adding capacity. So given that, what has surprised you in all this?
Well, what has surprised me, I think, is, as you point out, the evolution the project has gone through, which, really started commercially with us in the market talking to producers about it in 2010 and 11, culminated in 12 with our first round of approvals commercially for the project. And the original in-service date was at the end of 2017, so we're going to be a full 5 years after that. So it speaks to, I think, for us, the nexus we found ourselves in, and the number of debates and very important societal topics that we become the debate place for, whether that's Indigenous rights and reconciliation, or greenhouse gases, or climate change, or trade. So what has surprised me is the degree to which this project has become the place for so many significant debates in our country, all very, very important debates. And we haven't shied away from the role we need to play in those conversations. We haven't put our head in the sand. We've stood tall and with determination, and believe we're still doing the right thing for Canadians.
Mr. Anderson, thank you. I appreciate your time and perspective today.
You're most welcome. Thanks, Heather.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video. Thanks for watching.